Hey everybody, I'm going to attempt a topic that everyone has an opinion on, and some to greater efficacy than others, and that is some advice on parenting and training kids. And I remember pretty clearly, after taking a handful of psychology classes in college, including a class on learning theory and another one on motivation and emotion and all these other things, and several child development classes. I remember thinking, I've got this figured out, and my wife and I are gonna be able to do what a lot of other parents seem to struggle with, which is have organized, responsive, compliant children. And needless to say that the reality of that is very different. We've got a handful of children now, and I've gotten quite a bit more extensive experience in trying to understand and modify human behavior, and we still have a hard time with it. So just know that I'm approaching this from a place of realism and compassion. But I do have several things that I hope that will be beneficial and helpful for you. And some of them are very basic and very simple, but people really just don't seem to grasp these ideas, or at the very least, the observations that I see is they don't follow through on what they know if they know it. So just to give you a smidge more background, hopefully to build some humble credibility. I'd have those college classes, a master's degree in psychology, a PhD in clinical psychology, and a lot of my background is in the mental health arena and in the assessment arena. And so my training and professional history includes a lot of, does this child have ADHD or not? Does this child meet criteria for oppositional defiant disorder or some other behavioral dysregulation disorder? Does this kid have a learning disability or not? Is this a concussion, or is this something else? What's this person's intellectual functioning? What are the deficits that they have? I've done a lot of autism spectrum disorder evaluations. I already mentioned ADHD for children, youth, and adults. I've done parental fitness evaluations, and just the whole gamut of assessment, and then the recommendations attached to that report for where we go from there. And so I've spent a fair bit of time not just evaluating individuals and differentiating their strengths and weaknesses, but having discussions with parents about, okay, you've got this kid, they've got these challenges. These are the things that you need to be working on. These are the things that you're going to find to be most helpful to address some of this. And then I've got my own experience trying to implement those strategies in my own home with my own family. And like I mentioned at the beginning, it's one thing to know the theory. It's one thing to kind of say, yeah, these things will help. And it's another to consistently implement that and not trip on your own self along the way, because humans are complicated and messy. And I can know the right thing to say and do, but doing it consistently is a challenge. So let's talk about a couple of principles to start. And these are some of the core things that everyone should know. If you don't have kids, if you're into pets, which is apparently the cool thing to do now instead of having kids, you need to know these principles because they're super important. And they fall into the categories of reinforcement or reward and punishment. So there's positive and negative punishment, and there's positive and negative reinforcement. And when we say positive and negative, what we're talking about is adding something or subtracting or removing something. So a positive punishment would be adding something aversive. So a positive punishment could be, well, now you have to do the dishes when you didn't have to do them before, or you need to go and rake the leaves and that wasn't on your to-do list. go scrub the toilet, or an extra page of homework, or whatever. You're adding something aversive. That would be a positive punishment. And again, switch that, just use the plus sign instead of the positive term to help that stick in your mind. A negative punishment would be something that you are removing that they like. So taking away TV time, taking away dessert, not letting someone go to a friend's house that they're looking forward to. Those would be a negative punishment. You are removing something, and that removal is aversive. I've been in some settings where punishment is not a PC term, and so they'll say, well, it's a response cost. You made a particular response, and so it's going to cost you this privilege or this activity or this whatever. So those are a couple examples of punishments, removing something or adding something. A reinforcer, positive reinforcement, would be, hey, nice job, here's a hug, thanks so much for what you did. Doesn't have to be anything super complicated, right? But that is adding something positive. It could be giving someone a double portion of dessert, or a piece of gum, or moving them on a little behavioral chart thing, or giving them a sticker. Okay, all those are forms of positive reinforcement. A negative reinforcement would be taking away something that they don't want to do, that they're then happy for. So saying, hey, you don't have to do your chores today because you did such a great job yesterday. Or if your dentist calls you and says, hey, we've the office is closed today, and you're not coming in today, and you have this big sigh of relief, that would be a negative reinforcement. Something's been removed, and you're glad for it. So when we apply these to parenting situations, you can think of the classic example that we've probably all experienced or seen, where you're going through the grocery store aisle and the kid's whining or crying or screaming or begging or whatever. I really want this lollipop or this cookie or this thing or this piece of crap toy that costs $10. And you're like, no, you're not getting the toy, but I really want the toy. And it becomes this power or this battle of wills. And if you give in and you're like, fine, just take the toy, there are two things that have happened. You have had a negative reinforcement. The screaming and the nagging has gone away. And so that is reinforcing for you as the parent. And the child has gotten something positive. They have had a positive reinforcement. And so two things have happened. The child has learned that when you whine or beg or scream long enough or loud enough, the odds are higher that you will get what you want. Maybe it doesn't happen every time, but it will happen often enough that is what they will do. And this is not always a conscious, manipulative circumstance. It's just something that they learn to do. So the child is reinforced, and you as the parent are reinforced. Otherwise, why would you do it, right? Because you're getting this aversive stimulus, and you want that stimulus to go away. So you provide what is necessary to shut the kid up, your kid, and then you've got peace and quiet, right? So that poses a problem for the next time you go to the store, right? The same thing plays out again, and then pretty soon you have this monster child, and you're like, how did this happen? Well, it's because you gave in. And the child has learned that is worth the effort. So what if we did something just a little bit differently? What if before going into the store, you said, look, Johnny, I know we're going to the store and they've got candy and they've got gum and they have these little stuffy toys, and I know you're going to really want it really bad. But we can't have everything, and I don't want to have to fight with you in the store, so how about we make a deal? You're going to walk with me by the cart, or you're going to sit in the cart, or whatever, and if you're super good, I'm going to give you a piece of gum. Or if you can make it this amount of time, we'll do this afterward. We'll go home and color, or I'll get you one thing out of the dollar store section of the store, or something like that. So you're prepping them and giving them something in advance to look towards. And so in the end, the child is still rewarded. There's still this positive thing that they can earn, but you don't have the screaming and the yelling. So you're rewarding the right kinds of behavior rather than the wrong kinds of behavior. Now, when littler kids, that's harder to do, because even if you explain that to them, and even if they comprehend it, their brain capacity is such that as soon as they see it, oh, I really want it, because they just don't have that self-regulation in place yet. So you want to do your best to engage in appropriate distractions and engagement along the way, so that you keep their attention occupied in a useful way, and you have less opportunity for them to scream and beg and whine and those kinds of things. One of the things that you can do is let them hold one thing at a time. You're not guaranteeing or promising that they can have that thing, but if they want something off the shelf, let them hold it. You say, yeah, you can hold that box, but say, we're not going to take that box home, but you can hold it. And then they want something else, and I want that. Okay, well, we're going to have to trade. You can only have one thing to hold at a time. And then you swap that out, and of course the clerks may not be super happy about random things ending up all throughout the aisle. But this is to break the habit of, or what might be a habit of, a kid that really makes you want to pull your hair out. And then by the time you get all done with things, hopefully you have settled on something that is affordable or worthwhile to you, that you can say, okay, we have this thing and you really want it, but we're going to share. We're going to share with mommy and daddy or the other kids or whatever. So you end up buying one thing that hopefully is something that you wouldn't mind buying anyway, and you've managed to keep things manageable. The other thing to consider too has to do with what the interactions are like with your child when you're in the store. So often, part of this is by necessity, part of this is because we're just trying to get things done, right? We're not paying attention to our kid or kids. We're trying to find what's on our list. We're trying to find the thing on the shelf. We're checking, is that the right price? Is that the right brand? Is that what I want? And so we're effectively ignoring our kids continuously unless they do something that we don't like. They're grabbing something, they're making a noise or whatever. And so just from an attention standpoint, they're only eliciting contact from us when it's something problematic. When they're sitting quietly, we don't look at them. We don't say positive things to them, and so they get no feedback from us. And that's a principle that is really important across all settings when it comes to parents. And I'm guilty of this more than most. But it speaks to this idea that something that I learned over time, and I don't think is original to me. I read it at some point, but I found the statement to be very valuable, is that children and teens, or probably anyone for this matter, would rather have negative attention than no attention at all. Now, if you're an introvert, maybe that doesn't quite hold as strong of a pull over you, but kids need contact. They need attention. They need connection. If attention has a negative or aversive connotation to you, it's like, oh, they just want attention. It's like, well, what if you called it connection? Oh, they just want connection. You're like, well, what's wrong with that? we've lost sight of what attention connotes and implies when it comes to relationships with others, particularly others that rub us the wrong way or seem to take more out of us emotionally. So think of it as connection. Your kids want connection, and if you can talk with your child all throughout the trip through the grocery store and praise them when they're quiet, that goes a long way. And you can imagine how a kid feels when you get to the checkout line and you're talking to whoever's there and you make some positive remark about your child. Even if it has nothing to do with how quiet they were, find some way to praise them and comment in a positive, genuine way, so that going to the store becomes a good experience, not because they got something, but because of other things that happened there. And I am not one of those people that's, praise your child for every little thing, and they just need nothing but, overflowing piles of love and affection and sunshine and roses. That's not my style, and nor does the research support that as the preferred and only way of reinforcing your child. They need praise, clearly, but the frequency of that can get diluted when we do it too often and too readily and without any effort on their part. So let's go through another scenario here. Church is another big one. Sitting still for an extended period of time. They're supposed to be quiet, and if they make a noise, it seems like everyone around you hears it. And when you're the parent, even if other people a few rows or pews or chairs back from you don't really notice it, it feels like a bigger deal than it might actually be to you as the parent. So the classic dilemma is, what do you do with your kid when they're making noise? And at what point do you take them out, into the hallway or some other location so that you're not disturbing other people? And yet you're there in church to get some personal edification also. And I can tell you, I've been in so many meetings. Let me back up and tell another story. So when I first got married, I was looking forward to having children just so that I could leave church anytime I wanted. And even if the kid wasn't screaming or upset, it's like, I say, I gotta go, sorry. My kid's acting up. And so things have evolved over time, and surprisingly, I actually want to be in church and most of the time. And now my kids are the challenge that can get in the way of my having a edifying experience. And so what I was going to say a second ago is I've been in the hallways of church meetings, and my shoulders and my arms are just aching as I'm trying to get this young child or toddler to be soothed or calm down or fall asleep. And I want to listen. I want to hear what they have to say, and I'm stuck with my own kid out in the hall. And so I know both sides of it. One is where you don't care, and the other side is when you do care. So if we apply this reinforcement and punishment idea to kids in the hallway, this is an important idea. So if you let your kids roam free in the hall or in the aisle of your church or your church building, that is teaching them that that's okay to do, which I would submit is not a wise course of action, because it teaches them an incorrect principle of that there are certain locations and certain settings for sitting still and certain contexts when it's okay to run around. And during a church service is not a time for a kid to be running around. And I actually ran into this not too long ago myself. I lost sight of some of these principles, and we have a toddler, and we got there a few minutes early when the few times when we do, and I thought, I'll just let her get her energy out, and she'll run around, and then I'll pull her into the pew, and she'll be better contained. Well, and my wife aptly pointed out that that's going to be problematic, and is problematic because she's been running around, and now we're telling her to stop. and she has to sit still. And so it'd be better to, from the beginning, and to keep with this consistency and this training mindset to say, when we go to church and we're in this particular part of the building, or it's this kind of a setting, we all sit on a bench. And this is what we do. And I'll get to exceptions to that in a moment. And so I was glad that she pointed out that, that idea makes sense in theory, but it doesn't really work in practice. That of letting her, run around first and then sit still. At least in that setting. If you want to have your kids run around like crazy at home and then prime them to say, okay, we've got our wiggles out, now we're going to go and sit still. In church, that might go a little bit better. But that also brings up another point, which is that if your kids are crazy and wild and can't sit still at home, you better bet money that they're not going to be able to do that at church. And so we've done things at our house where if it's been a particularly bad day at church, we go through some stuff at home and say, look, running around is fine, but not at church. And running around is fine, but not in the classroom at school, or whatever the scenario is, and say, okay, so we're all going to sit here and we're going to do our best to sit still for this amount of time. And when you've done that, you're free. And just to kind of reinforce this idea that you can do this, it does take some practice, and we'll base the interval that we expect out of you based on your age and your individual abilities. But we're going to stretch that over time so that you get more and more used to sitting still. And you can do this with little kids. Which brings up to the next point, which is to make the church sitting experience rewarding. So you have some quiet activities that the kids can do. We are personally in our family generally averse to the idea of snacks because at least for me in the training mindset is that children reach satiety, they get full at some point, and then what do you use to keep them entertained? Plus snacks tend to be more messy and crinkly, and so we tend to stick to coloring books and coloring pages, and they have those little doodle things that you can draw on, and you press a button and it erases. It's kind of like a really low-tech tablet thing. So you get the kid there, you're in your pew or your row of chairs or whatever you have, and you give them something that is going to keep them entertained. If they're freaking out, and this has happened so many times I can't even count, they have the one crayon I want, even though I have the exact same color in my hand. I want that crayon, and a fight breaks out. If you can't immediately resolve that and you've got to remove a kid, this is a critical point. If you take a kid out of the main chapel area and you're out walking the halls or out, walking the parking lot or whatever's available for you, you don't give your kid free rein, because that becomes a reward. Oh, I was stuck in this narrow band of chairs, and now I can run around all over the place. So the habit that I've got into with my younger kids is if they have to be removed from a church meeting, I hold them the entire time. It sucks for me, but it also sucks for them because they want to walk and run and play and do all these other things. But I don't want to make the removal situation more reinforcing than where they were. And so they'll squirm and they want to get down. It's like, we can go back and we can color, or we can go back and you can play with this little soft book thing you have. And so I am letting them know that and there's even room to walk around in that little space that you claim. But giving them something so that they actually prefer to go back eventually, because they're tired of being held and just standing there looking at the wall. So the function then is to remove the screaming for the benefit of other congregants, church members, however you want to say that, and give the kid a chance to calm down and help the child self-regulate. That's a whole nother conversation topic we could have, is helping a child to learn how to self-regulate and participating in that. But once the screaming and the emotion has been better contained, the goal then is to get the child back and have them want to go back because they have more options at the bench. We went to Boston a number of years ago and went to some of those old school churches that they have, and some of the ones that we saw, they actually have this almost like a oversized cubicle where families would sit, and apparently you would pay to kind of reserve that spot in your chapel. And so your family would kind of claim this little box. And I remember thinking, like, this would be great for a herd of children. Like, you keep them all contained in an enclosed space, and you have some benches in there. And so I kind of wish we had some of those that style now. Doesn't have that open feel to it. But people like to claim benches and spots anyway. Why not box your children in? But so those are a couple things to keep in mind about ways in which we can encourage kids to make it easier for them to do those things that are going to be most effective. And this applies in classroom settings and in other settings as well. And we'll probably have to do a separate video talking about how to apply this to teenagers, because that's a whole nother animal. But let's see. And some of you might say something along the lines of, oh, I try to do something with my child and they don't listen, or they scream, or they run away, or, I've tried these things and it just doesn't work. Well, I would submit that what's probably happening is some variation of what I described in the grocery store, where you try and restrain the child screams, you let go, they go free. So you have been reinforced by not hearing the child scream and not making a scene. The child is reinforced by saying, I got away and now I get to do what I want. So you've got to be willing to have a higher threshold for the screaming, and that starts at home. If your child is non-compliant in the grocery store or at school or in church or on the playground, they are not compliant at home. Okay, and there might be a couple of exceptions to that. I know some of those, but in general, that's what you're going to be seeing. So you've got to figure out, okay, what's reinforcing? What am I doing that's reinforcing for the child? And what is the child doing that's aversive to me that I then am trying to avoid? And looking at those dynamics to be able to say, okay, how do I want to fight this fight? And so choosing your battles is another parenting thing, to say, okay, the kid has a package of fruit snacks, and if I try and take those fruit snacks away, it's going to be a meltdown. Is that worth it to me? To say, no, you are not having another package of fruit snacks or whatever it is. And taking 5 to 10 seconds to say, okay, am I ready for this? Am I all in on this? And if you are, then do what you need to do. But of course, try and do it in a way that eases them into it, that giving them some warnings and say, you can hold that for another 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and then I'm going to have to take it away from you, and then hold to that, right? Don't back down on whatever it is that you say. Be consistent. You don't want to be so rigid and so structured that things become abrasive in all of your interactions. But part of the reinforcement and training principles that we're describing here have to do with how much your kid believes what you say. If you say, we're going to bed in 5 minutes, 20 minutes later, you're like, okay, we got to get in bed, and then, it's another 30 minutes by the time they're actually in bed, going to bed in 5 minutes means nothing. You lose your credibility, and you lose the power of your words. And so again, this is where the hard part of being a parent comes into play, because you might mean it in the moment, but then something comes up and you get distracted, or something makes it harder for you to execute what you intended. But we've got to do our best to mean what we say and say what we mean. And part of that means is no sarcasm. That's another great way to undermine your credibility as a parent, because one of the things that's reinforcing is those verbal praises. Say, oh, good job, honey, thank you. And so if that's one of a reinforcement that you use, but then in another situation you're like, oh, great, thanks. For the first round or several rounds, the kid's like, wait a second, is that a good thing or a bad thing? But then they quickly learn that it's not a good thing. But then when you say it for real, that becomes tainted also. And so when I say mean what you say and say what you mean, don't use sarcasm unless you're both clearly in a sarcastic moment and it's understood and it's positive. Because otherwise you undermine your power as a parent and you weaken your relationship with your child. And maybe that pans out more in the teenage realm than it does for kids, but not always. So just to conclude with a couple of things, I've read a ton of parenting books over the years, and I've browsed through a lot of books over the years. One that I've read more recently that I really liked, that I think is a good place to lean into, is No Drama Discipline. And the no drama discipline speaks to this idea of you need to have that relationship with your child, but you also need to have the structure and the consistency. I've read books that it's all about the relationship, it's all about the nurturing, and it's just, to me, it's too warm and fuzzy, and to the point that it feels enabling, and enabling may not be the right word. It almost feels like you're going to be holding your kid back in the long run, that they're talking about things that will keep adolescent rather than helping them evolve into adults. And then there's books that are way too about the structure and the rigidity and the learning components of things. And so No Drama Discipline did a pretty good job of kind of bridging the gap there. We've got to have that love and compassion, and there is room for flexibility, but it's got to be deliberate and thorough and wise. A big portion of my efforts to improve as a parent come from the gospel imperative that we have of children of our Heavenly Father, or heavenly parents, who invite us to become like them by trying to raise our spiritual brothers and sisters in families. And the family, a proclamation to the world, which is a worldwide proclamation by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, something you can find online, speaks about the importance of families and doing our best to raise them in love and integrate a variety of holistic approaches and characteristics to help our families thrive and become more like our Savior. And of course there's the famous Psalms in Psalms 22, I think it is, that train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it. Notice that it doesn't say a specific time frame, but it does say that when he's old, so it might take 20, 30, 40 years before a child finally says, you know what, Mom, Dad, thanks for your efforts to guide me in the right direction. Thanks for what you did to try and make me a good person. And so we've got to keep doing our best and keep trying, even though it is crazy hard and you want to pull your hair out, but involve the Lord in your efforts, and involve an integration of spiritual and secular learning, so that you can have the Holy Ghost to help you discern, I read this principle, or I read this technique, or this idea, or this theory. Does that fit for my child or my children? Maybe it fits for one child, but not another child. And that's where the power of heaven can help you, like I said, discern how best to execute what you're learning, and also discern when an exception to the rule may be in order. So maybe you've got a good strategy, you've got a good system down, and it's working, but then you feel this nudge to say, you know what, I think we're going to make an exception to the rule. We're going to let the kids stay up late, or I'm not going to fight them on this issue, or I'm going to, not push back on this behavioral violation and let it go. Because I think I have a suspicion that that's kind of how God works. He has laws, he has structure, he has expectations, but he also has flexibility in there too, to help us achieve and help us use our agency and our power to choose in a way that allows us to exercise our freedom and learn from our mistakes, and then make better progress than we would otherwise if we had everything overly restricted. So I hope some of those principles were helpful for you. There's a lot more here that we could unpack and a lot more examples that we could use, but we'll stop for now.